Mark Massar, you were a sergeant in the Air Force, and you played a role in sort of the aftermath of the tragedy, the Jonestown tragedy in Guyana in 1978. And so we'll discuss that, and of course, hundreds of people are involved in the response to the Jonestown incident, and some of the roles are major, some of the roles maybe would not be considered major, but all of them come together and create the story. So we'll talk about your part. But just the first question is, when you hear that word Jonestown, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Honestly, and it wasn't in the beginning, but it's don't drink the Kool-Aid. That's been a real pervasive part of my life.
That famous phrase that comes from it. Yeah.
Like it kind of dictates my life in a way, right? That I use it all the time to this day. Especially with politics and whatever. I think I'm very acutely attuned to, I don't want to know, honesty or truthfulness or anything that applies to don't drink the Kool-Aid, don't fall for it, don't, and so I don't know whether that's tied to my Jonestown experience, because it's almost, people we take such casual liberties with the truth, right? Especially in today's politics or whatever. And so I'm always, my friends are sick and tired of that phrase from coming. I have to watch out.
Of course, as time goes by, I think a lot of folks don't know where that phrase comes from.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. And it reminds me, I'd love to talk to somebody. I guess Kool-Aid is still produced. I have no idea, but I'd love to talk to somebody in that business and ask them what they did with that as a marketing thing, as a marketing challenge, because it was actually Flavor Aid.
Right.
Yeah. Tony, that's just one of the little things that comes out of it. It would be interesting actually to talk to somebody in that company, because they must have had a meeting. What are we going to do about this, if anything?
Negative publicity, right? Like we're getting the Flavor Aid. We got nothing to do with it. Negative.
Right. Yeah. So you were in the Air Force, Air Force sergeant. So and you do play a role stateside. You don't actually go to Jonestown, but you play a role stateside. Right. So let's just walk through that. And what's step number one on the way to, playing a role in the aftermath of Jonestown with the U.S. military?
Wow. Well, I don't know if you want to start from it would have to be, how did I join the Air Force to begin with?
Yeah.
Because it all kind of leads into it. I don't know whether we want to start from there.
Well, sure. Why don't you tell us? Well, maybe a good place to start would be to tell us, before you went to Dover Air Force Base, what your job was, because I'm guessing your job had something to do with why you went. But what was your job in the Air Force?
Well, I was just turned 18, and I had enrolled, and I was in technical school in Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls.
Yeah.
And I was training to be a medic. Not a combat medic, but a hospital medic, or what we call bedpan jockey.
Yeah.
So my training was just finishing up, and I had received my assignment. It was going to be to become a immunization specialist at an Air Force base in Ohio, Wright-Patterson. And so I was all set to go, and I don't remember exactly the timeline, but just before I was going to leave, they called me and they said that my assignment's been changed, and that I'm now going to go to Dover, Delaware, to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. And I didn't know, sure, what, except I wasn't going to be an immunization specialist anymore. Now it's going to be a hospital medic. And I didn't know what that entailed. But one thing was the same as the another, and I had never heard of Jonestown, didn't know anything about it. And so I just, that's how I ended up at Dover, like a last second switch.
Now, is it just coincidental that you were sent to Dover, or was it because the bodies were either there or on their way there from Jonestown?
Yeah, I mean, the bodies were already there, so I think they saw some extra need to fill a slot for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you've interviewed a lot of service people that, people get pulled out of service all the time. You have to
Sure.
fill those
Yeah.
holes. I don't know if they were prepared for all the
Yeah.
bodies that arrived. I showed
Yeah.
up pretty late, actually.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that now. But so you said you'd never heard of Jonestown. Does that include like even a week after the event? I mean, were you just,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's really common. Young people just aren't paying attention to the news.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was busy with basic training and then, my formal training for tech school,
Yeah.
technical training. So for those 12 weeks, there was no such thing as TV in my life.
Right.
So even before that, never had I heard of Jonestown.
So I mean, do you remember when did you first hear that the base you were going to actually had some connection with this huge event in South America?
I think I was there already. When I showed up, like several days after I arrived.
Wow.
As I recall, there was no, and even then it didn't really imprint on me. It didn't have any meaning. It was because it wasn't there in my face. It was just something obscure out in the mortuary section.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so walk us from
I mean,
walk us
I'm an
from
18-year-old kid.
from that state of blissful ignorance to now, to that moment when, you do actually, you're now physically close to the aftermath. Do you remember that? Do you remember kind of crossing that bridge from that state of blissful ignorance to, wow, okay, this is something pretty big that went down in South America?
No, unfortunately, I don't.
No.
I worked with a lot of, so I was assigned to a barracks
Yeah.
where to sleep and such. And so in that particular confine, there were a lot of people who were directly involved. I didn't know them. I never knew them. They would come and go. My schedule as working in the hospital was 2 weeks evenings, 2 weeks nights, 2 week days on rotation. So I was always coming and going. And, in the beginning, I didn't really make any acquaintances, but there was a lot of strange stuff going on, right? That the people there were having a very difficult time coping with a number of situations. I don't know, again, with service people, coming to the realization that you may have volunteered to go into the service, but you can't leave, right? Hotel California. You're stuck there no matter, and you're going to do what they tell you to do, whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people had big problems with that.
Because they were being asked to, for lack of a better phrase, process the bodies.
Yeah.
And this isn't what you have in mind when you're joining the Air Force.
Right. Yeah. I really don't think that they were prepared. There were a lot of people, even in basic training and, all the way along the line, that just couldn't deal with the fact that they were confined. Like whatever kind of modern day slavery you want to equate service to. You sign, you can't escape. And so it hit them, right? And so,
I'm sorry.
A lot of drug use, like I didn't think that kind of stuff could take place in space.
Right. Yeah.
Just open usage of it, and I'm like, that they must have some allowances for what's going on.
Yeah, it's the post-Vietnam military, right? The post-Vietnam, pre-Reagan military.
Yeah.
So I have a recollection of the kind of things, that you're talking about. Just, you go from being a pretty free 18-year-old to being a pretty unfree 18-year-old and everything that comes along with that. But it sounds like you're also saying that at Dover, in addition to those challenges that you get with young enlisted military personnel, it sounds like you're saying an additional challenge was the particular work that some of these guys were involved and gals were involved in, processing the bodies from Jonestown. Do you have a recollection of that? Did that just kind of create a certain kind of spirit, a certain kind of vibe in the place?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was only at Dover for about a year.
Yeah.
And I transferred out and went to another Air Force base, Bergstrom. was in Austin, Texas. Now it's their international airport.
Yeah.
So I and I also stayed in the barracks there.
Yeah.
So there was I don't know whether it's Austin, Texas probably has something to do with the vibe or the atmosphere or whatever, but it was night and day between the barracks at Dover and the barracks at Bergstrom.
How would you describe the vibe at Dover when this whole processing thing was going on?
How would I describe it? I mean, I wish I had the perfect adjective. I mean, it was, you say the impressions like it was always overcast. You get in the environment, because I showed up in the middle of the winter. I showed up in January of '79, and in February we had a huge blizzard, like the biggest blizzard they'd had in 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And the snow was packed up, halfway up a car, and so it was a very compressed mood. People, and I always equated it with like a New York attitude. Right there. What was Dover like? Well, Dover is an East Coast vibe, and East Coast people are dour. They're strangers. They're non-communicative. They're wary of other people.
Sure.
Where Texas is friendly and open, and there's sunshine and
more sunny.
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, so you're describing the weather, and there's that East Coast vibe. Did the connection between Dover and Jonestown, did that make that vibe all the more somber? And that's what I'm trying to get at. Like,
right.
Like the cycle, was there kind of a psychological vibe that there's this thing going on base that kind of has people weirded out or something like that? I mean, would you say that was part of we're using the word vibe. Was that part of the vibe in Dover? Do you think so?
I would definitely say that in those particular occasions, there were occasions. I only really knew one person who was directly involved in it.
Yeah.
And so when he would go out there to work and come back home, he would know whether TV cameras had been out there that day. And so he would be all excited to see whether he made it on TV or not. So we would all gather around, and I'm sure there were other people who were involved in this, but I just never got to know them, right?
Yeah.
So the whole dorm room, the whole common area where the TV set was, would become crowded with people looking to see whether, who would show up on the news and whether they recognized anybody. And it's always seemed to be on a Friday, for whatever reason, that the camera crews would do some kind of an update or whatnot. And there was like one, it wasn't every Friday, but there was one occasion where people were like, oh yeah, there's Jim or there's Bob. Because there a lot of people are living off base, right? The dormitory is really only for single unmarried people. Yeah. And there's a whole nother married, people for off base housing or whatnot. So they would recognize this person who, wasn't in the barracks but lived off base, something like that.
And you're saying that the camera crews were there because they were reporting this unfolding story.
Yeah, there's some kind of an event that occurred out there, some kind of investigation. And it was the broadcast news, there were only the 3 channels at the time, but it might be ABC or CBS,
right? Something
like that, and they would come out.
Yeah, and one of the reasons the bodies are still there, to my understanding, is that a lot of the bodies, or some of the bodies, went unclaimed. And then, because the bodies come in November, you're there in January, February, but the bodies are still unclaimed. There are difficulties finding places to bury them. A lot of cemeteries don't want to accept bodies. There are things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sorry?
The only way to identify a body back then was by dental records or fingerprints. So there was some delay in getting those particular records, like, who is it? First, you have to know who was down there. They had all rescinded their U.S. citizenship. And so they could have just been left there. They were no longer considered U.S. citizens, but the U.S. took the time and trouble to bring the bodies back. But like, whose body belongs to which person?
Yeah.
There's no DNA test that you can do. So I think that some of the reason it dragged on was because, well, we don't have any dental records to try to match it up with this person, because they were all in California. This is all taking place in Delaware, and no email, no fax. I guess there might not even have been faxes at that time. I think we were still using carbon paper and stuff like that in 70s.
I think so. Yeah.
So I think there's a little delay, and then all that stuff that you said too.
Right. Yeah.
So,
now, did you ever, personally see anything related to that process, to the processing of the remains from Jonestown, the coffins or things like that?
That's a tough one. Before I say that, and before I forget, in preparation for meeting you, I was, I hope you don't mind, I was researching you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I Googled you and looked up whatever information and looked up a video that you had done, so I'd know like your interview style and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I saw, as part of that there was a mortuary in Dover, Delaware, that closed in, I want to say 2012, and they found 6 bodies from the Jonestown massacre that hadn't been identified and had been left in the corner somewhere.
Really?
Wow. So you can Google that and you'll see that and they say, well, if it happened at this mortuary, there's probably others, but I didn't find any articles that kind of updated that. And this is after that whole debacle at Dover, Delaware, in the mortuary section, where they would just discard parts of bodies that couldn't be identified in general, not just with Jonestown, but Army bodies. If all you had was a hand or a finger, and there was no way to identify it, they were just throwing it all into one common pile. Right? So there was like a huge, like, what are you talking about? So this is after that they then discovered all these, they were cremations. These bodies had been cremated from Jonestown, and I don't know whether they were identified or not, but at whatever rate, you'll see that there was a big scandal in Dover, and you can see a lot of newspaper articles. Nothing I saw on the national news, because I'm very attenuated to anything. I watch anything that comes out with Jonestown, right? That any special, any whatever. So my radar goes off when I hear the word Jonestown or Jim Jones, whatever. And I never knew that until I looked into you. So
I wonder how that...
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so you were looking up something related to me, but then that led to this other thing.
Stuff I had never knew about myself. And
no, I've never heard of that either.
Yeah, it's real weird. And so you said, did I have any direct connection, right?
Or did you, like personally, directly see things there?
I want to say I did, but I really honestly don't think I did. But when I look into it, it seems like I want to block it out. It's the weirdest thing. I don't know. It didn't affect me, right? I mean, can we assume that I did? I don't know whether these memories that I have are false memories or what's going on with it, but like my impression, the impressions that I have a distinct memory of being loaded on a truck early in the morning along with everybody else, right? We're on a special mission. It was kind of a cold day. And I remember, I want to call it like an Army transport carrier, right? Like a big truck with the sidewalls on it, and we all pile on benches out. It's not, it doesn't protect us from the weather. And so I remember taking a ride out to somewhere that seemed like an aircraft hangar. Not the mortuary part, but the aircraft hangar. And there we met another truck that had a bunch of metal caskets stacked on it. And our job was simply to take the caskets off of that truck, bring it into this aircraft carrier, put it next to this stainless steel cot, I would call it. It wasn't a not what you see on TV as far as where they do autopsies or anything, nothing permanent, but it was kind of and I've seen pictures of it. Again, looking into your situation, I ran into these pictures that, that's what I seem to remember, but I never looked up before, honestly, right? So where would I get this impression of this stretcher if I'd never seen it before? And then the most distinct memory that I have is that they would take they would open up the casket and the body was contained in a plastic bag. They would take the bag and they would put it on the thing, and I remember somehow walking away and hearing a plop and looking back to see that an arm had fallen off of the stretcher part and splattered on the floor because of just and it was black and swollen and nasty. And for some reason, if I saw it, I want to block it out. And if I didn't see it, it's like, why am I of all the things to make up, why am I making this story up, right? So it's a very, very confusing thing. I've always hoped to find some way to like the military documents everything, right? So somewhere there would be a document of me getting onto the troop transport. Somewhere there would be a document that, I was excused from the day for this particular service, right? And that would verify that, oh, no, I am blocking this out. Or, no, you made it up. There is no such record. But, maybe it's a collection of stories that other people had told me, right? That this one gentleman that I knew who was actively involved in it, that he would come back and tell me things about what he saw, and maybe that's something I want to piece it together.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Well, do you remember anything that he said about what he saw? Do you remember anything that he said?
Yeah, well, the one thing he said that I don't recall is the particular smell being so bad that day that he had to wear 2 masks instead of 1, and it still wasn't helpful. So he had these masks that were sprayed with some kind of peppermint to kind of help block the smell. And he said, 1 wasn't enough, 2 wasn't enough. I don't know whether it was a warmer day or whatever, but I distinctly remember that, whereas I don't have any recollection of having to wear 2 masks or any mask at all.
Yeah. Now, when you were there, and we'll just assume that you did this operation this one day. I mean, in addition to the visuals, I mean, were any other senses affected? I mean, was there a smell that you picked up as well?
Yeah, very hyper attenuated to any kind of smell of death.
Yeah,
a very sweet and sour smell to me. And so if I'm walking somewhere and there's a dead bird or some animal, roadkill, it brings back some kind of, I want to say a false recollection of what death smells like. I'm like,
So when you smell that does bring you back to that incident at the base.
Yeah, even little smells, anything that smells like death will bring back some recollection of my time at Dover. Way beyond just the Jonestown thing, like working in the hospital, anything like that. It brings back a flood of memories.
Sure. Yeah. When did you realize, you said that even after the event itself had taken place, you're busy getting into the Air Force, getting your training and all that, and so you didn't really know what Jonestown was about. At what point did you realize that, that Dover was attached to what actually was a pretty huge story, the biggest suicide homicide in modern history? I mean, was that later on when you realized that, this is actually linked to something really huge? Or did you realize that while you were there?
I mean, I realized it while I was there, but not the impact. I mean, when you watch your friend or, you watch acquaintances on television, moving these bodies, or you yourself being involved in it. I had no impression of any of that. Really, it was many years later that I kind of realized just how impactful that was. I don't, to be honest with you, I might have been in the throes of PTSD. I guess that's what they call it these days, from just my whole period of my enlistment, how I got enlisted. You know, you go through basic training, which was, for me, I was Gomer Pyle, you know, and my sergeant was Full Metal Jacket. Has a lot of meaning to me because I was that Gomer Pyle, and my drill sergeant was Lee J. Ermey, screaming at me for sneaking a donut in, or things like that.
Yeah.
And then tech school, I was sexually assaulted. I was both sexually assaulted. I had a questionable priest, and I thought I was witnessing a sexual assault that someone else was committing, and I actually got thrown in the brig for that for a while. So it was all very tumultuous 4 months from, you know, you ever heard of like a Section 86?
No, I don't think so.
That's somebody who has to enlist to avoid a conviction.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, I was one of those, so that's how I'd say that. You know, I went to see a judge, and he's like, well, either you enlist today or you go to jail.
Okay, yeah.
Like, well, okay, I'll enlist. So boom, boom, you know, see the judge, the next day enlist, the next day go to basic training. 6 weeks later, go to tech school. 6 weeks later, go to Dover, Delaware, you know, which I don't think I'd been out of state, but only to visit relatives in Wisconsin. There's a whole different environment than growing up in Texas, thrown into the East Coast by myself.
Yeah.
Having expected to go to Ohio, so it was a very, you know, I was a little bit out of sorts. So, you know, other people's problems come second to your own.
Sure, yeah.
I think I was more involved in my own situation than what happened to a bunch of dead people in Guyana, right?
Yeah, I hear that.
Who had rescinded their citizenship.
What's that?
Who had rescinded their citizenship.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they got a big contention about that.
Yeah. Well, I haven't heard that either. So I didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
No, yeah. To go down there, you had to, you know, not the children, of course, right, but the parents. They all, you know, they agreed to no longer be U.S. citizens. They were citizens of Guyana. So it's like, well, why bother to go get them, you know, if they don't even want to be part of the United States? And we spent many millions of dollars, right, and time, effort, and
that's
who
right.
had rejected. I think that's a great statement of America.
I think so.
So we took the time and trouble to go ahead and bring back and identify them and try the best we could to give them a proper burial because, you know, they had been under the influence of this madman.
Yeah.
And his underlings, right, that, I don't know, Jim Jones, you know, that's one thing, right, but then you have lieutenants, right? Jim Jones can't do it all himself.
Yeah.
He had these lieutenants that no one has barely ever investigated for their particular role, and I don't want to even say carrying out Jim Jones's role, because he was whacked out on drugs as far as I can tell at the end.
At the end, yeah, I think that's
so
right.
His lieutenants who are running the show, you know, managing 900 people, that's not going to be done by one person alone. There was his cadre of women. He had, what's it, 3 or 5 women that he was, his wife and women that he had slept with and had
a couple sisters, and that's
they were pulling the strings a lot more than him at the end.
That's an interesting theme. So you said a little while ago that when something comes up with Jonestown but I didn't catch exactly, you are interested in it or you're not interested in it?
Oh, yeah. They're very hyper attenuated, right? I watch it all, I read it all, I look for it. I'll even rewatch some stuff.
Yeah.
I'll partially to see if there's any of those news clips that I remember. Right, the ABC News that would come out to Dover, Delaware to film people moving the caskets around. And if you look really hard, you can find a couple of them. if you Google the web these days,
Yeah.
you'll see some random pictures of people just on duty at Dover, moving a casket from here to there. There was a lot of shuffling going on.
Yeah.
The bodies had to have been frozen, which is part of my false memory recollection, right? That if I'm there in February and I'm tasked with going out to help move these caskets so that dental records can be identified, the bodies had to have been frozen. Where they hadn't been kept in their state all that time since November, continuing, without some kind of refrigeration process going on. So I don't know why I would think that the arm would fall off the body like a piece of meat. Yeah, so it's all very confusing. But yes, I'm very, I try to I try to explain to myself w's going on.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And so even if let's take the worst case scenario. Let's take the worst case scenario and say that even if this one day, let's just say the whole thing is a false memory. Just for the sake of conversation, let's say that even if that is the case,
sure,
it still says something about the impact of this event on someone who was, in Dover where this process was going on.
There are degrees of separation.
Yeah, and so if nothing else, it does say something about that.
Oh yeah,
which then gets to the magnitude of the event.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And I was sexually assaulted there by someone who may have been affected profoundly by what was going on in Dover. He was a lot older than myself. So I think, my age, just being 18, had a lot to do with it, right? So somebody, as you get older, you seem to see the enormity of the events that are going around you that I don't think you kind of grasp when you're 18. You're too selfish at that particular point. You don't really have any kind of an aspect. So maybe even, if not for Jonestown, I don't go to Dover. That's for sure. If not for Jonestown, maybe I don't get sexually assaulted. Now, he wasn't successful, right? He just he got on top of me and I had to beat him off of me, which I was successfully able to do. But, that caused a series of repercussions. So that's why I was only in Dover for a year. I got out of there and went to Berkston. So,
but your interpretation is that guy, that what he did was a response to his work with the Jonestown thing, that he just kind of freaked out or something?
No, I don't know that.
Okay.
He might have had that. I mean, he was his sexual propensity was for other men to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. He might not have been aware of that. Now, does Jonestown exacerbate that? Does he come to the realization? Like, why did he, why did he attack me? Right. That there was a lot of crazy things going on. It was all part of the environment, right? Like that. I wish I was explaining myself better, right?
No, you're fine.
So I want to say, like the broken window theory. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
In policing, right? So if you're walking down the street and you see a broken window, then you think it's okay for you to throw a rock. So there was a whole, it was okay to do drugs on base. It was okay to do this. It was okay to do that. So in this hedonistic environment, in this place gone crazy, because Dover is a very isolated place. I never visited Dover, the city itself, right? So you're on this base, you're locked in this base. You don't really go that way, especially in the winter. You're kind of locked inside of this dorm room. And so the whole, the mentality of people affected kind of radiates outwards in a way that you can never detect or even claim. But nonetheless, what they say that what is it? CEOs set the environment of a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
They say that's, I'm not using the right word, not the environment, but the
No, the spirit or the,
right.
I get what you're saying, the tone.
Dover. So I think Jonestown kind of had that effect on the barracks that I had. So
Well, it makes sense, yeah.
coincidental, right? It's very coincidental
Right.
that he whatever it may have pushed him just that little bit, like to attack me. Like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. I never met this guy in my life, so
Yeah.
why he chose me at that particular time, you got to find a reason, right? So the only reason that I can come up with is Jonestown. So who knows?
Yeah, maybe some sense that sort of creates a feeling of psychological instability, which then has repercussions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he feels lonely and he wants to be comforted, and he picks the totally wrong way to do it, right?
Yeah.
That he feels trapped and he can't go to meet somebody that he would like to meet somewhere off base because that's not really a possibility. The one guy who had a car went crazy and drove it right into a brick wall. So it's a guy, and he was my roommate before, my first roommate. So he seems all right. And then one day he drives his car into a brick wall and he gets discharged. So I get a new roommate. So
This is also Dover where this guy does it?
Yeah, he was from Pittsburgh, a real nice guy. And, he just went off the edge one day.
Yeah. So
Literally.
just to wrap up, it sounds to me like, like what you're saying is, if nothing else, having all of those bodies that come up from Jonestown in Dover create, or at least significantly help to create an atmosphere there that leads to a lot of problems.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that whatsoever.
Yeah, that's my main takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could word it better. I probably, if talking out loud is a lot different than ruminating, right? So
Sure.
it helps to kind of, you realize that you're not providing the correct words to describe.
No. I'm getting what you're saying, and I appreciate you taking the time. I think this is an important contribution. So just getting information on. We've been using the word vibe, or just the atmosphere, the tone that exists at this time, and the how people are interacting, the impact that it has on individuals. Other stuff is going on, but it's hard not to think that if you've got hundreds of bodies that have come in as a result of something so horrific, including a lot of children, it's hard to imagine that that's not going to have a significant impact on
a morose environment. Is that a morose would be a good word, I think.
A morose environment, yeah.
There's not a lot of joy. There was not a lot of happy people walking around. Everybody seemed to be, mentally under the weather, that there was a cloud under everyone's head. And it was only when I got to Bergstrom that it seemed to be sunlight again. I was like, wow, that's pretty weird,
And that's in Texas.
I blamed it more on the East Coast, but now I'm older and I realize, no, that's the East Coast mentality, because, when things were pretty dire in '79 on the East Coast. New York was close to bankruptcy, and, I'd never really experienced cold or, overcast. I'm used to Texas weather. So now I kind of see that, no, that doesn't explain what I was experiencing among the people that I interacted with. There was something heavy, and it was Jonestown. As far
That
as
makes a lot of it makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
it's very hard, right? You could never, a detective you could never get proof on paper. There's no test or DNA test or any kind of objective thing that would prove it. But I think we have enough experience now to know.
Yeah.
I need counseling.
That makes
this has been like a counseling session.
Yeah. Well, send you the bill later. Yeah. I really appreciate you taking the time. I think this is important. So again, for me, the main takeaway is you've been describing a certain atmosphere, a certain tone on the base, and what you see is, something that happens, thousands of miles away in a little South American country comes to Dover, has an impact on people there, and here we are more than 40 years later still talking about it. So it's an important event.
Living with the false memory. Some goofy false memory. It's like, well, why do I have this? Of all the things to make up, why do I feel the need to make this up? Or did I make it up? And, and the whole, the hyper-attenuation to anything to do with Jonestown, and my own little conspiracy theories about, what does mother please mean? Does Jonestown, Jim Jones is calling that out at the end.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he was calling his wife mother. He was calling other women mother. So, to my mind, and I've never heard anybody ever, that's why I'm hyper attenuated. Is somebody going to make that kind of connection, or am I just reading too much into it that he was actually thinking that it was the wrong course of action? But he was so drugged out and stupefied that all he could do is cry out, mother, please, as if, no, stop this, right? And it was actually his coven that was executing the plan that he had originally constructed, right? Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
And looking up the thing about the cremations that were found, 30 years later in some abandoned Dover mortuary. I think that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Yeah. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for sharing this. I appreciate it.
Now, if I could, I just want to thank you because one of something very important to me in my life are the slave diaries that were created by people during the Great Depression. Right, the government went and hired all these journalists, go out and interview, people about their slave experience, and reading those is just so enlightening to me. And can you imagine if that hadn't happened and we don't have actual human recollections? So God bless you for your work, and I hope someday you find, in researching you, I found an article about one of the actual 8 dentists who were involved in actually doing the dental matches.
Wow.
So I think interviewing him would be very interesting. And
sure.
Who knows him and who's done stuff on him is the other gentleman. You of course are you're Preston Jones, and who's the other gentleman that I've been working with? Fielding.
Yeah.
He knows that guy. He knows how to get in touch with that dentist who was actually one of the 8 who had to, he said he did, between him and another guy, they were actually responsible for 70% of the bodies.
Wow, yeah.
So he would be a very interesting interview. I hope you can get in touch with him.
Well, yeah, I hope so. And if you happen to, be in touch with anyone that, please pass that contact info to me. I'm hoping to. Every story matters, and we want to get them all in. So, yeah.
Smallest ripple in the pond.
That's right.
Thank you. I was wondering how this would go. Why me? It seems so insignificant. But God bless you for your work. Good luck.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks very much.
You bet, sir.
Take care.
Goodbye.